Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Capital Connection, where we join the dots to give you the big picture for business in Africa. I am Fifi Peters. On tonight's agenda, it has been a year since Zimbabwe's founding president, Robert Mugabe's 37-year rule was abruptly ended by a coup d'etat. The military takeover saw widespread jubilation on the streets. Then the subsequent and disputed elections were held that saw ZANU-PF voted back into government and the mood soured. But a year on, what, if anything, has changed for the beleaguered country? Our panel gives their views. But first, it is arguably the biggest day to date for South Africa's judicial inquiry into state capture, presided over by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. It's the day the Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan is delivering his much anticipated testimony. Gordhan is seen as playing a crucial role in protecting national treasury and the fiscus from wide-scale looting and plunder during the presidency of Jacob Zuma. Our correspondent Karabo Letlatla is at the commission and joins us. Karabo, Gordhan's submission was leaked to the media last week. Do you think that this has in any way stolen any of his thunder at the commission?
Well, Fifi, that is precisely what some of the members of the media and the interested public are really thinking here. Some go as far as to say that this is Pravin Gordhan's revenge for those that stole his testimony here before this commission, and that he's slowly going to inch to the point until those that have been implicated by state capture have finally confessed. But yes, there is a bit of that. You can see that the man has really tried as hard as he can to keep his thoughts his own, and he feels that there's a broken trust between himself and some of the lead attorneys for this commission here. So yes, the thunder is a bit out, but a lot of that testimony was known by the public. The part that we do not know really is how much he will infer state capture on former President Jacob Zuma.
Exactly, which brings me to my next question, though, because just how damaging could Gordhan's testimony be to the presidency of Jacob Zuma and his associates that are implicated in this grand theft?
Well, it goes without saying that towards the bitter end, and that's how it must be characterized, that Pravin Gordhan and his comrade, former President Jacob Zuma, did not see eye to eye, that Gordhan stood head and shoulders as one of the proponents that was actively fighting state capture within the governing party, the African National Congress, as he calls it, and also from outside and within the state. You remember he was a member of a portfolio committee that looked into the governance at state-owned institution. So I do not expect Pravin Gordhan, on the weight of evidence, to say something bigger than what has been inferred here by former Public Enterprise Minister, who is also in the room in the proceedings, Barbara Hoggins, as well as that information and testimony that has been given by former Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene, who spoke about how much he had to really fight the president from triggering his 1 trillion rand project, which was the nuclear project. So on the weight of evidence, I really don't expect that the former president will bat an eyelid more than he did with the previous testimonies.
And I see quite a lot of protest action happening there right behind you with the Red Berets. I mean, Julius Malema's EFF protesting Gordhan's presence at the inquiry. At one stage, they used to be on the same page in their opposition to Zuma and state capture. What do you think has changed?
Well, Fifi, one, there's no such things as permanent positions in politics, and I think we learned this in the morning when we got here, just before Pravin Gordhan took the stand to give his testimony. Really, you found unbecoming and, unbecoming bedfellows, if you will. You had the EFF on the one side, which is saying that Gordhan must actually leave his job on the basis that he lied. He said to an EFF parliamentary question that he's never had any interactions with the Guptas, but only time has come to prove the minister wrong. And in his 68-page affidavit, he actually details one of those meetings that he had with the Gupta family family. So that's another thing that we're going to hear before the end of this testimony. But it was really odd to find the BLF, which is an organization that mushroomed from the EFF, if you will. So between the two leaders, Andile Mngxitama and Julius Malema, they've never seen eye to eye. But today, they are all here protesting against Pravin Gordhan. Of course, the BLF is saying that he is a proponent of white monopoly capital, and he's just here to represent capital interest, and he doesn't care about you and I. I think the jury's still out on that, but we all make our own minds.
And finally, Karabo, so far from the testimony that Gordhan has shared, what has stood out for you? What has been the highlight?
Well, Fifi, I'll tell you this one. I think that finance minister in a Zuma government might as well has been you or me at home watching television, because that's how Pravin Gordhan found out that the end of his tenure, second tenure as finance minister, ended on the 31st of March 2017. He says that he was not afforded a courtesy call, that President Jacob Zuma merely just let him know through the media that he saw it on television, and his redeployment, I guess, into the portfolio committee that looks into governance of state-owned entities was subsequent to that. But there is a lot that Pravin is detailing that, for me as a bystander, I feel like there was really no respect afforded by the former president to his ministers. He wouldn't even take them into his confidence, let alone take the public into his confidence.
Sounds like you're saying it was essentially his way or the highway. But Karabo, let us leave it there. Thanks so much for those insights. And now it has been a year since President Robert Mugabe was removed by Zimbabwe's ruling ZANU-PF as the party's leader. Mugabe's ejection then paved the way for the former first vice president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, to assume Zimbabwe's presidency. There was a sense of euphoria at the time, a belief that the worst was over and the country could begin to fulfill its potential. So, leading to the break, here are some views of Zimbabweans living in Johannesburg about developments back home since the coup.
I have seen nothing. Mnangagwa is just somebody who's sitting there and he don't know anything. He's just somebody who's just wasting our time. At least it was better to give that young boy. It was better for us. And that is very true for us. Here we are in South Africa, but cost of living for us is not good. And we are suffering here. We want to go back to our country, but we can't go back to our country because of the situation of the current situation we are facing in Zimbabwe.
There's nothing changed. It's still getting worse every day in each day.
Apparently there is no change. So we are asking politely to our president. In fact, he's not our president, he's a chief, that man. We are asking him politely to step down and put the right person to do the job, because he can't do anything.
I haven't seen change in Zimbabwe since quite some time not residing in Zimbabwe because of the infrastructure of Zimbabwe and everything which is happening. It's been gone worse since Mugabe left.
Nothing changed. Even I think things went worse than before.
We must go back, but the thing is we can't go back because of the situation. And Mnangagwa is adding something like an insult to injury. Our injury was better, but now it's worse.
There are no changes. Things are becoming tougher every day.
Welcome back. Joining us to discuss Zimbabwe 1 year after Mugabe was deposed is in Lagos political analyst Chude Achike. In Kigali, political analyst Christopher Kaumba joins us. And in Harare via Skype, we are joined by Fadzayi Mahere, a Harare-based advocate and constitutional law and human rights lawyer. Fadzayi, let's begin with you, as this is closer to you than any one of us in this conversation. When this coup happened, it was heralded by the world as one of the most peaceful coups ever seen. There was a lot of hope that Zimbabwe had finally or would finally turn the corner. In your view, on the ground there in Zimbabwe, has anything changed since Mugabe left the seat of power?
Thank you very much. I think very little has changed. In fact, you see increasing tensions, starting, of course, with the economy. Zimbabwe's got a very striking monetary crisis at the moment, which obviously commenced during Mugabe's era, but it's become markedly worse over the last year or so. The domestic debt, ever since Mnangagwa came into power, has increased to 9.5 billion, money spent by the government which hasn't been accounted for. As there are political tensions, the MDC continues to dispute the legitimacy of Mnangagwa. And then obviously the social tension. You have the military on the streets on the 1st of August, shooting at least 6 people. All of that has come together to really make it a lot of the same. And a lot of people are not confident that Mnangagwa is much different from Mugabe. And all the investment, all the talk of Zimbabwe being open for business, all of that has been eroded increasingly over the last year. So things are very much the same, and daily life for the ordinary Zimbabwean is becoming much, much, much more difficult.
Right, so it sounds like we have gone from bad to worse possibly there. But Christopher, just to draw you in here with your political insights, why do you think, as Fadzayi has just said, that very little has changed, even though there was hope and promise of so much more change?
I think that the biggest challenge many African countries face, and in this case Zimbabwe faces, is the character of the state and how legitimacy is gained and reproduced. When Mugabe was deposed by the military, there was an attempt to say it wasn't a coup, that he resigned, but it was a military coup. And many people were very happy that Mugabe has been removed, but they forgot that the character of the state and the role of the military had not changed. So even up to now, if you see the former head of the military is now the vice president to Mnangagwa, and some of the men who deposed Mugabe are in his cabinet. So I think the biggest challenge is to do with the nature of the state in Zimbabwe, which rotates around individuals who captured power after independence in 1980, and the role of the military is still important. And secondly, I also think that Zimbabwe shows us the challenge many African countries that adopted confrontational type of politics faces, because I think there are many studies that show that where you have confrontational politics in plural societies, divided societies, outcomes are mostly contested. And finally, Zimbabwe also shows us that unless power emanates from citizens, it doesn't matter who the leader is. Because in this case, before Mugabe was deposed, many people thought Mugabe was the problem. But as it turns out, the biggest challenge is not Mugabe, but the structural conditions and lack of a culture of democracy in Zimbabwe and broadly in much of Africa.
For sure. Chude, would you agree here that things like the character of the state and the role of the military not changing are the reasons why we haven't seen the new dawn that President Emmerson Mnangagwa promised following the removal of former President Robert Mugabe?
Yes, absolutely. I think we got to a stage where, we could remember a statement made by Louis XIV of France when he said, "Je suis l'État et l'État c'est moi." I'm the state and the state is me. And so, that was what we saw at a time. We began to look at Zimbabwe through the prism of Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe became the state, and the state was Robert Mugabe. And But unfortunately, it has events after that, the removal of Robert Mugabe have indeed, really told us that the same state that brought Robert Mugabe to power, the same state that nurtured him and got him to consolidate himself in power all over the years, over the decades, has not essentially changed. He's still essentially the same state. If there is any major advantage of the removal of Robert Mugabe from power, it was the fact that having stayed for so long in power in Zimbabwe and having consolidated on power and personalized power to an extent that Zimbabwe did not descend to serious civil war or crisis, just as we saw with Houphouët-Boigny, for instance, in Cote d'Ivoire, who stayed for decades and then institutionalized everything, and the state he became the state, and the state became himself. And we also had the same thing with the man from Burkina Faso, Blaise Compaoré. It was a process, the crisis eventually that removed him from power. So if there was any benefit from the fact that Robert Mugabe was removed from power, it was because the same people who had been part and parcel of his administration, there was this intra-class struggle within themselves, and they were able to ease him out of power peacefully. And Zimbabwe did not descend into chaos and crisis. So I, recognize the fact that it is the very same state that, brought him to power and sustained him for decades that eventually removed him. So if there was, so the only thing that changed in Zimbabwe was the personality of Robert Mugabe. Because at the time, like I said, people were looking at Zimbabwe through the prism of Robert Mugabe. So he became the symbol of everything that was bad about Zimbabwe. But once you removed him, then we saw the contradictions that had sustained him in power. That same contradiction, the system, system itself remained in place. Both the military, the political class, the political party under which he was, president, still essentially remained the same. So there was nothing fundamental. It was the change itself was cosmetic. And that is why we have seen that Zimbabwe has not exactly moved in any positive direction since Robert Mugabe was removed from power.
Christopher, when Mnangagwa came into power, he hit all the right notes in terms of what should have inspired business confidence. He spoke about dealing with the indigenization laws. He spoke about returning the farms that were taken from white farmers under the previous dispensation to them. He spoke a very strong Zimbabwe is open for business message. This has not yielded the desired results because we still have business there sitting on the fences and still reluctant to rush into that economy anytime soon. What will it take to lift business confidence? Because clearly the word of the president, which should have been the most powerful in any country, was not enough.
I strongly believe that unless the political question is settled, unless the role of the institutions like the police and the military is agreed upon by all Zimbabweans, and therefore you don't have the police or the military brutalizing the opposition, unless a civic culture is restored between political actors, then it does not matter so much what the president says. Because as you know, politics is the software. Politics is the software of all realms of society. So when you don't settle the political question, other challenges related to the economy, related to socio-economic relations between individuals, related to foreign policy will suffer. So I still strongly think that Zimbabwe has not settled the political question and does not have a political settlement where all critical elites agree to live by the rules of the political game. Unless that is settled, and probably there is a kind of reconciliation to heal wounds of the past, it will be difficult to solve other challenges related to the economy that Zimbabwe faces. That is why I believe even when you held the elections in July and contested in court and the opposition lost, still the opposition is still contesting the outcome because the political settlement because the political settlement is not consensually agreed by all the political actors, and because the opposition still knows that Mnangagwa is in power because the military supports him. So unless that political question is resolved, all other elements of the Zimbabwe society will remain in question.
Right, and of course, resolving the currency issue is also critical. Many companies, multinationals operating in Zimbabwe are complaining that they're unable to get money out, and certainly this doesn't inspire confidence. But I mean, Chude, if we wrap up this discussion, I mean, Zimbabwe is not unique in having a leader who refused to get out of power after decades and decades of already fulfilling that seat. Many African countries can testify to that of, you know, essentially having a very old or pensioners running the state, if you allow me to be blunt. What can those countries who are also looking for political change learn from the way Zimbabwe did it? So lessons from Zimbabwe in enacting political change. What would you say the top 2 or 3 are?
Yes, I will respond to your question shortly, but maybe just a little bit from the very last speaker. While agreeing substantially with some of the things he said, I would disagree slightly a little bit, because you see, what the scenario that he talks about is a scenario that you can, you know, attribute to most African countries today. And the fact that a lot of the countries in the continent have all kinds of political issues, economic issues, social issues, and so on, is simply, as a result of the fact that the political questions in those places among the political elites have not also been settled. And so until you settle the fundamental issues, yes, most of the countries in Africa cannot move forward. But when you look at Zimbabwe, for instance, and some of these other, I think we should not be looking at the government of Mnangagwa resolving all of the political, social, economic contradictions of Zimbabwe at this particular point in time. What we just see is that what this government should be a bridge to the very next government, a kind of transitional government. Yes, they are in power, but they are going to transit to another political dispensation. And this is where you now have the MDC. Who should, if you ask me, as much as possible, as much as they believe that the election was stolen, but I would say that, from what they have done, they scored about 44% of the votes in this very last election. So what it means is that they are very primed to take over power in Zimbabwe if they can play their politics, properly. And then with regard, so they need to, as much as possible, cooperate. And the international community, too, should do much more. I think that at this particular point in time, they cannot talk about a puritanical government. They are the way I feel, yes, there are so many contradictions there, but I think that they are failing, Mnangagwa to a very large extent. He has done all he can do, at least to do a kind of, yes.
Chude, just to interrupt you there, we have just a minute left. Your lessons for other African countries that Zimbabwe, or the lessons that other African countries can learn from the way Zimbabwe changed power in 40 seconds.
Yeah, but again, the change of power in Zimbabwe was purely circumstantial and to a very large extent selfishly motivated by a particular class. It was an intra-class party, struggle within the class itself, had disagreements and needed to move, on time before they were decimated by the government, of Robert Mugabe. So I do not think in terms of lessons learned, yes, the military played a role that was seen as positive because they had removed a man who simply refused to move with the signs of the times and all of that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was purely circumstantial. We still have very serious problems in Africa, just like you have said. I think the people need to play a much bigger role because they are the greatest losers in, within the political dispensation if the wrong kind of political leadership is brought to power. Is the people that can either gain if they have good political elites, or they will lose if they have bad political elites. So it is in their interest to be much more meaningfully engaged in governance so that they can hopefully change the political dynamics of their countries.
Right. Chude, thanks so much. We will leave it there as that is all we have time for at this stage. Thank you so much to all my guests. And for more analysis on Zimbabwe, 1 year after the coup, tune into Political Capital tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Central African Time. And join us again on Capital Connection every Monday and Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Central African Time. From me here in Johannesburg, it is good night and bye for now.